Welcome to the Red Pill Sports and Entertainment Show. I am your host, Albert Apache, and brought to you as usual by Open Source Self-Defense, Fitness, and Grappling. So we got a lot of things to talk about this week. Number one, we're going to talk about coaching and accepting coaching. Number two, we're going to talk about Tom Brady and the New England Patriots and their dynasty. And exactly what does this mean for football? And why is it that the Patriots winning is the best thing for all 31 other team fan bases other than the Rams? Why was that best for everybody else than the Ram fans? And then we'll get a little bit into some UFC and a little bit into the NBA. All right, guys, buckle up. Let's go. So let's talk a little bit about coaching. Here's the thing, guys. You can have the best coach in the world, but if you're not listening to your coaching advice, it doesn't really matter. You have to be in a place where you're ready and open to take a opinion from outside of your perspective. And the reality is that we all need coaches still. I have a jiu-jitsu coach, of course, and I always will have a jiu-jitsu coach, whoever that might be, my primary jiu-jitsu coach. Maybe in 15 years it might be a different person. Currently, it's Pedro Diaz out of Tiger Slayer Jiu-Jitsu, and he is under Gustavo Dantes here in the Valley area. And basically, the coaches that are there at Tiger's Lair can give me all the advice that could conceivably help me. But if I'm not going to listen to it, it doesn't really matter. One of the things that, in particular, that I can talk about is a particular pass in which you kind of kick your leg back. And a pass, for those of you who don't know, is when you're trying to get around somebody's legs so that you can control their upper body. They're generally on their back, and you're usually either seated up kind of on your knees or some kind of squatting type position, or maybe even standing on your feet. And there's one, it's called, people refer to it as the Toriando. Some people call it the X pass or the kickback pass or whatever. And there's a point where, as you step over to one side, let's say you're stepping to the right, you step with your right leg to the outside, your left leg kicks all the way back, and then when it comes back in, it steps right next to the person's hip, or that's where you're aiming to step. And I had heard this particular coaching advice before about it doesn't matter if you get it all the way to the hip, even if you get it to the inside. Once you get it on the outside of their leg, you can start working your pass. If you're diligent, you can still work the pass from that particular point. And I would always come back and reset. I would get frustrated, and I was working way harder than I had to get a lot of passes. I wanted it super clean, like textbook or picture perfect, if you will. And finally, for whatever reason, I was at a point where, this one particular coach, Christian Diaz, kept telling me this, and he finally came over and he walked over and he showed me exactly what he was saying, and he was like, just try it. And for whatever reason, I finally was open to listen to this particular coaching advice. I'm usually pretty good, but in this instance, for whatever reason, I wasn't listening to this coaching advice. I finally started listening. And lo and behold, that particular pass has become much more efficient for me. Now, that's not to say I don't still have things I can work on in that pass. There's plenty of small details, and I know that. That being said, I had to take the advice. It doesn't matter how good the advice is if I don't take it. And so that's the same when it comes to, let's say, your fitness or weight loss goals. A coach can talk to you blue in the face, tell you how to do a lift, teach you how to do a lift, teach you what exercises to do. You could be asking, hey, I want to make my booty bigger. And, coach can be like, well, it's kind of hard to focus train or focus chisel fat, but here's some things you can do that can give you the illusion of having a bigger butt. Here's some things to help activate or pre-activate your glutes so you make sure they're working to their optimum, when you're doing squats and you're doing lunges, things of that nature. But if you don't take that advice and follow it, it doesn't really matter how good or how correct the advice is. And you see this all the time. I mean, for instance, Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki. I mean, how many copies has that book sold? The advice is solid advice, but does it matter when people don't follow it? It doesn't really matter. And also, you got to kind of have to think about what place you're at sometimes. As a coach, also, you have to flip that on your head sometimes and look at your athlete or your student, and you have to ask where they're at. It doesn't do me a lot of good to give good coaching advice to a one stripe or two stripe white belt about how to do inverting reverse De La Riva back take, even though the advice is sound, when that particular student is not at a place in their journey to understand what that advice even means, or that's not even what their goals are right now, right? Their goal has nothing to do with taking their back. Their goal is like, how do I just keep anybody, inside my guard? How do I keep guard retention? So as coaches, sometimes we also have to step back and kind of look at it and say, well, what is the most applicable advice I can give to my student or my athlete at this time? And I think that even, goes into parenting. Somebody who really illustrates this to me is, for instance, Gary Vaynerchuk. He's talking about a lot of the content you should be doing and making and things of that nature. And every once in a while, he'll stop, he'll catch his breath, and he'll actually clarify and say, well, if what you want to do is crush it and be big and be the best or whatever, because that's not what everybody's looking for. Not everybody's looking to do that. Not everybody is looking to buy the New York Jets like Gary V, right? They're looking to make $40,000 a year. They're looking to make $100,000 a year. They're not looking to make billions of dollars someday. That doesn't mean his advice still isn't sound. That doesn't mean his advice still isn't good advice, okay? But it does mean sometimes as coaches we have to remember that when we're working with people one-on-one, that we have to coach to the position that our athletes or our clients are in. So it's kind of hand in glove, right? Coach has to be giving the right advice for the situation, and as the student, as the client, as the athlete, you have to be willing to take that advice. You need to be willing to actually put the suggestions into practice in order to have success. Okay, let's shift gears and let's talk about the New England Patriots win and why it was the best thing for football if you're anybody but a Rams fan. Okay, guys, so here it is. Look, Super Bowl just passed, Patriots and Rams. This is a red pill take when it comes to why it was, a good thing that the Patriots won the Super Bowl, that they came out and did what they did. And I'd even argue that it's a good thing that they won in the manner with which they won, which was a defensive game, controlling the ball, controlling the clock, playing a short pass, almost like a West Coast style offense. And, it ended up being a good thing for the league. And this is why. Let's look at the NBA for a second and what's going on in the NBA. Right now, we have star players basically dictating where they're going to go. They're basically congregating together to make these big, giant super teams. And as I stated on a morsel maybe last week or so, it's really not good for the NBA product or NBA brand that this is happening. And this is why. Basically, players want to go to big markets because, well, everybody pretty much wants to go to big markets. Not everybody, but a lot of people do, right? A lot of people want to move to LA and wish they could live the LA lifestyle, making buku bucks. Everybody wants to move to, New York and, live the New York lifestyle, right? These big, storied franchises that are in the big market areas. Well, the reality is that this is actually detrimental to the NBA because in these smaller markets, let's say here in the Valley of the Sun, the Phoenix Suns, they're really not that good right now. They're having a hard time selling tickets. They're having a hard time filling up that arena. And that's not good for the NBA, and it's not good for the franchise. Having a bunch of, a handful, of globetrotter-like teams in the NBA and, plethora of the Washington Generals is just not smart marketing. Now, the thing is, in the NBA, it's somewhat sustainable because a single player can be so impactful, when he accounts for 1/5 of the personnel on your team. Now, in football, that's a much harder thing to do. And the issue is that if you look at the Rams, basically, if you take their salary cap, they essentially tried to buy a championship this year. They went very aggressive, trying to sign players. You look at the top 50% of their salary cap is taken up by 7 players. Of those 7 players, that doesn't even include their quarterback. Okay, it includes 2 defensive tackles, 1 left tackle, 1 cornerback, an inside linebacker, a wide receiver, and a running back. Account for over 50% of their salary cap. Had they won the Super Bowl, because of the copycat nature of the NFL, you could bet dollars to donuts that the next franchise over the next 2 to 3 years would be trying to build these super teams. Now, the problem with super teams in the NFL is that just because you have talent and you have really good players doesn't mean you're going to win. Coaching and system really makes a big difference. I mean, in athletic performance, let's just be honest. Let's say Todd Gurley, let's think of another running back, C.J. Anderson on his own team. The actual physical drop-off in performance is not staggering, okay? It's not like going from, a running back, that runs a 440 to a running back that runs a 550, right? You're talking a 440 to like a 4.8. And when players are moving that fast, when they're that big, they're that strong, they're wearing that kind of equipment, if you're a good coach and you scheme properly, you can account for the minor drop-off in, athletic performance or capability. When you look at the New England Patriots, they have 8 players, so 1 more player before you're talking about above 50% of their salary cap. And it includes their quarterback, Tom Brady. So you look at the Los Angeles Rams salary cap, and it's just not a sustainable salary cap when you know they're going to have to re-sign and probably give a bonus to Jared Goff. You look at the New England Patriots, and what do you have? You have the quarterback, you have a cornerback, a free safety, a tight end, an outside linebacker, a right tackle, a tight end, and a guard. Those are actually pretty good positions to be giving percentages away to. Also, if you look at their percentages, they drastically drop. So, for instance, you have Tom Brady accounting for like 14% of the salary cap hit of those 8 players. After that, it drops off to 7%, about 7.5%. And it continuously drops off after that, almost a full percentage every single next position. So you go 7.7, 6.9, 6.1, 5.7, 3.8, 8, 3.80, and 3.79. So you see that the drop off in percentage per player drops off very, very quickly. In other words, New England Patriots value the most intricate, most important part of their offense, which is the quarterback, the player that touches the ball on every single play, and they prioritize that. After that, everybody else is going to be in single digits. When you look at the Rams, you have 3 players that are above 8% to start it off. And then it's 5, 4, 4, and 4, or somewhere in there. Almost 5, actually. It's like the 2 lowest are 4.71 and 4.79. So when you look at the percentages of who's eating up the salary cap, as far as sustainability, it's much better for the Patriots. What the Patriots showed in this Super Bowl is that you can win with superior coaching and superior scheme. You can win that way. It also showed that you want to find players that either fit your scheme or build your scheme around the players you have. I really thought that, McVay made some really strategic mistakes when it came to the Super Bowl and when they lost. And I think a big part of that was that he didn't want to go away from what they had done well the entire season. He stuck to what their tendencies were, and you didn't see as big of a variation. Okay? You heard that, basically that last drive that won the game for the Patriots, that basically the offensive coordinator, scrapped the game plan, went to Tom, went to the offense and said, hey guys, we're scrapping this. I know we've barely practiced this in our game plan, but this is what we're going to start running. And they did it. And that meant they had to huddle up. But you know what? It worked. It worked because they realized superior coaching. They realized that what they were doing was not working, and they changed course. So all in all, I think that this was the best thing that could happen for the NFL and the NFL fan base. I think it's the best thing for the brand overall. I think it's going to be really good for Dallas Cowboy fans, because now Jerry can go and say, hey, look, Tom only makes X amount of money. I don't know if you're a Tom Brady just yet. So I think Dak will end up taking a little bit less money. So there you have it, guys. I really feel like this is an outside of the box kind of, perspective. I think most people like the idea of their teams going out and getting stars, changing the coaching staff. I mean, and really, there's a lot to be said about patience and developing players and developing a game plan. All right, man. Let's shift gears. We're going to talk just a touch about the NBA, and then we'll get into the UFC. All right, guys. So before I get into the NBA really quick, just a little quick note, apology. If this segment is a bit loud in the background, I'm sorry. Once again, it is a beautiful day here in the Valley of the Sun in the Phoenix metro area, so I am outside recording this particular portion. So anyhow, let's get into it. So with the NBA, I've been saying it, and I'll say it till I'm blue in the face. I think the NBA has a problem when it comes to the way they're allowing stars to dictate so strongly where they go. Now, I know that this isn't a new thing. I know that, Charles Barkley forced his way to the Rockets and things of that nature. I know that basically, at the end of the career, Jordan kind of, put his foot down, and that's what ended kind of the Bulls dynasty. I get that. But we're talking about after players had put in at least a decade of time, right? It wasn't like they came in, signed one contract, and one contract later, all of a sudden they were demanding where they were going. That has never happened. That part of it is unprecedented in the history of the NBA. I stated things about as far as, the Globetrotter type teams, with everybody else being the Washington Generals, and even beyond that, what it's also doing is it's also going to, and you're going to see it, I believe, with the Lakers this year. I think you may see a implosion when it matters most. Because I'm sorry, we all know here that basically you have four people calling the shots for the Lakers that are in the war room, if you will, right? You have Jeannie Buss, you got Magic Johnson, you got Walton in there, the coach, and then, of course, you have LeBron James. Now, how are the guys, that the young core that, they just invested in, how are they going to feel going forward knowing that just about nearly all of them were considered less valuable combined, people, not a single player, but combined, were less valuable than one single player? How are they going to react to that? I mean, it's starting to the point where it's going beyond business, right? It's going to be taken personally. Now, I have some other issues when it comes to brand and personal brand and why I think it's a bad idea. The Ball father is a prime example of that. But let's talk about who were the, winners and losers of the 2019 NBA trade deadline. Well, first and foremost, I think the biggest winner, I'm going to hold that. I'm going to hold the biggest winner. I think the second biggest winner was the Mavs. They got a player that is really going to help them going forward, is really going to put some firepower onto their roster. And then the other big winner is the other side of that, which is the Knicks. And, clearly Porzingis did not want to be there. So that would mean that, why keep him around if he didn't want to be there? And they didn't hurt anybody's feelings there on the squad that they have, but now they're going to have a maximum amount of money so that they can go after Kevin Durant or possibly Kyrie Irving. And that is going to be a bidding war. So it wasn't like I believe the Knicks were going to contend this year anyway. So I think that they did the best that they could. So those are the two biggest winners. By far, I think that the biggest loser is the Los Angeles Lakers. They basically have thrown in the towel on the young talent. Basically, that's what they did. They raised the white flag and said, hey, this young talent, this young core, it's not going to get us where we want to. Basically, LeBron had to have signed off on that. So how are those players going to take that? Jeannie Buss must have obviously signed off on that. And, Magic is there signing off on that. So maybe short of the coach, everybody else pretty much signed off on, hey, you can take these guys if we can have this one guy. So I really feel like the Lakers are the biggest loser of this trade deadline. Not only did they not get the guy they wanted, but they probably, ruffled the feathers of their other players, as well as they didn't get anything really that productive done. So it's going to be an issue. Which brings me to the biggest winner. The biggest winner, I believe, were the Boston Celtics. Now, yes, they did do some of the Laker-type things where they did probably ruffle the feathers of Kyrie, but that being said, they didn't ruffle the feathers of a good chunk of their entire roster, okay? It's one guy, and let's face it, if he wants to win and he wants to be the leader of the team and they offer him the contract, he's going to stay. Not only that, but by doing nothing at all, by basically sitting there, not trading anybody, not getting anything too messed up, they are now in the lottery to sign Anthony Davis, right? And I would say that would put them as the front runner, especially if they can keep Kyrie. If they can keep Kyrie, I think that, it's going to be a very attractive spot. Now, I know that only gives them two of what I guess you would call the super players, but I mean, gosh, their young core is really good. They were able to not upset or rock that boat too much. So I really feel like the Boston Celtics were the biggest winner of this NBA trade deadline. Now, to be fair, to put it all out there, I am a Boston Celtics fan. So, but I really did think this was a smart move. And, Ainge is on record as saying he does believe that, the engagement is still on for July with Kyrie. So he does think that they'll marry with a long-term contract come July. So that sounds like good news to me. All right, guys, let's move on. We got a lot of stuff to talk about coming up this weekend. Let's go ahead and transition to the UFC and UFC 234. All right, guys, let's talk a little UFC action. We got UFC 234 coming up. And quickly, let me give a shout out to the Weasel MMA. Actually stole this shot here. I love his work. For a really technical breakdown, you should probably check out his channel. I'm going to go over more why I think people are going to win rather than the technical breakdown. Now, as far as this card goes, I think this card is very top heavy. I completely agree with the Weasel. I think they're really counting on the co-main event and the main event to sell. And so with that, hopefully there's no last minute hiccups. Now, one of the things that the Weasel has pointed out many times and seems to prove itself true, let's hope that it continues that way, is that a lot of times when these cards look like they're a little bit lackluster, they really deliver on the action. So let's go ahead and move on to the co-main event. So the co-main event is Israel Adesanya versus Anderson Silva. Again, credit to the Weasel. Love his work here. Decided I'd go ahead and take this shot. Now, here's the thing, guys. The reason why I cannot trust Anderson Silva. If you guys are not aware, Anderson Silva is 1-4-1 in his last six fights. That means he's only won one fight, he's had 4 losses, and 1 no contest. The problem I've seen with Anderson Silva over the past couple of years is that rather than playing his game, he seems to get either too playful, too goofy, a little emotional. Here with the Nick Diaz fight, he didn't really like being clowned, even though he loved clowning other people. Against Michael Bisping, I think that he allowed that fight to slip away. I feel like he had that fight. He should have won that fight on the cards. But he also had an opportunity to finish Bisping, and rather than finish him, he just kind of played around. He kind of elongated the fight. And then you saw a very, very similar thing when he fought Brunson. Again, this was the fight that he won, but if you watch that fight, he should have lost it on the scorecards. It went to a decision. He did win the decision, but again, he kind of played to Brunson's game rather than playing his own. In stark contrast, when we saw Adesanya fight Brunson, Brunson tried to play his game, tried to be the wrestler, tried to be technical, but Adesanya was just having absolutely none of it. He was much more tactical, much more explosive, much more precise, and overall he just overwhelmed Brunson. It was a much more dominant performance than what we saw out of Anderson Silva. And at this point in his career, I don't know if that it might just be that Anderson's accomplished so much that he's just fighting for fun, for lack of a better term, rather than fighting for legacy. I think he thinks his legacy is cemented, which I believe it is. So not only do I see Israel Adesanya winning this fight, I think that he wins this fight in devastating fashion. I think we may even see something out of Adesanya that we didn't know he had, which is some type of ground game. I do see Anderson Silva at some point maybe getting knocked down, maybe trying to pull Adesanya into his guard, some kind of crazy thing like that. And we see Adesanya just pass it like a hot knife through butter, and the fight is over really quick. So that's what we have on that one. Next, we have Kevin Gastelum challenging the champ, Robert Whittaker, for the belt. Now again, credit to the Weasel for this shot. I really liked his work. Again, check out his breakdown, guys. Now, when we look first at Kevin Gastelum, we see a shorter fighter that brings a lot of power to the table, and he really knows how to get in on an opponent. We saw the way that he slipped and countered Bisping, and oh my gosh, to be completely honest, I did not see that coming. I thought it was going to be a very long, boring fight. Bisping trying to outpoint him, and wow, amazing fight by Gastelum. Now, I know that the Weasel has picked Kevin Gastelum as his nightmare matchup. That being said, I really felt like his last two fights, which he won the belt, right, I felt were actually much more challenging fights. I feel like those fights presented more problems because Yoel Romero was much more explosive. He does cover distance very quickly, and his MMA wrestling, I feel, is much beyond Kevin Gastelum's. He also is very tricky with the way he lulls people to sleep and sometimes explodes and kind of changes his shot to look like, or makes it look like he's going to take a shot, and then he comes up with that flying knee. And what we saw was in the second fight, we saw that Robert Whittaker somewhat evolved and started to fight a longer distance fight. He didn't dart in and out as reckless as he did the first time. Now, some of that may have had to do with his leg and his leg getting injured in the first fight. However, that being said, I really feel like Robert Whittaker gives us a little bit different, a little bit more advanced techniques every time we see him. And because of that, I think that's exactly what we're going to see. We have the shorter fighter that likes to get into the phone booth and Gastelum. We have the longer fighter, kind of a karate style, that likes to fight from far. So it's the middle range and the close-up range where Gastelum's going to have openings. I just don't think Whittaker's going to allow that to happen very often. I think that Gastelum's going to have very few opportunities. I think that Whittaker's going to look to use the teep kicks to keep him away. He's going to look to use the leg kicks to chop down Gastelum, make sure those shots are not coming. It's always a tough thing to try to shoot because you have to change levels to get a takedown when your opponent is throwing leg kicks. I don't know that Gastelum is long enough to get over the top after a leg kick or a teep kick, because that's usually one of the big counters that a lot of guys throw to kicks, is they come really big, try to come over the top. Now, that works for usually most fighters who are relatively the same size, but I really don't know if Kevin is quite long enough to reach, but we'll see. All right, guys, remember, check out the Weasel, man. That is an amazing, if you are not a huge fight fan, but you just want to get some insight, man, he does a great, beautiful technical breakdown, really gives you the things that you want to look for. Check him out. He's got a great channel, man. Thanks, guys. We'll catch you all later. And as usual, be practical, be purposeful, get fit with a purpose.